Well, I want to share a story from when Heather and I were dating. When Heather and I were dating in our early 20s, Heather moved into an apartment in downtown Evansville. A couple from the East Coast had purchased a Civil War-era townhouse in the historic district just a couple of blocks from the river. They converted the back half of this house into a 3-story townhouse for their family, and the front half they converted into 2 apartments, one upstairs and one downstairs. Heather lived in the upstairs apartment. Now, I was visiting her one afternoon, and I wanted a snack. She had chips and salsa. That happens to be one of my favorite snacks, but I hate just putting the salsa on the plate with the chips. I want to put it in a bowl because you can't really scoop it very easily. It goes all over the plate. So what I did was I poured the salsa into a bowl. I put the bowl on the plate with the chips. And as I was leaving the kitchen, I guess I angled the plate wrong and the bowl of salsa slid off. Well, it was a plastic bowl, so when it hit the floor, it bounced up and flung the salsa onto the wall. So there was a 3 or 4 foot streak of salsa across her white wall. I heard Heather say from the other room when she heard the crash, "What was that?" Well, hoping I could clean it up before she saw it and got upset, I said, "Don't react, don't react, don't react." That is word for word what I said, by the way. Well, she came and looked anyway, but she ended up being more amused than anything. First of all, she was baffled as to how I managed to fling so much salsa so far across her wall. She said she was confused by the physics of it. And second, my don't react made her laugh. It would become a joke between us for a while. But the reason for my don't react was because I wanted her to hold off on getting angry about the problem until I was able to fix it. I wanted her to forbear. I wanted her to be patient. And it's that kind of forbearance, that kind of patience that Paul was talking about when he listed patience as one of the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit, by the way, are traits, virtues that the Holy Spirit produces in us as we discipline ourselves to hear and to obey Him. The image is of the Spirit as a gardener growing these traits in us like fruit. But as we've also been saying over the last few weeks, we have some natural human impulses that can often drown out what the Spirit is telling us. They keep us from developing fruit of the Spirit like patience. We've identified these human capacities as instinct, emotion, and intellect. Paul calls these human impulses the flesh. These natural impulses are not inherently evil. They're actually God-given and natural, but they're primitive. Left to their own devices, they lead us into behaviors and attitudes that are destructive. They're destructive to God's will and purposes for us. They need to be guided. They need to be trained. They need to be tamed by our conscience. Our conscience is the human capacity to hear the Holy Spirit. It's through the conscience that the Spirit plants within us those fruit of the Spirit like patience. So, how do our instinct, emotions, and intellects resist patience? Well, one primary component of instinct is something called anxiety. When any developed creature, including human beings, feel threatened, that creature experiences anxiety. Anxiety is an instinctive impulse to act in response to a threat, either by running away or by fighting. That's why this impulse is often called the fight or flight response. When we're in physical danger, this kind of anxiety is useful. That's why God made us able to experience anxiety in the first place. Without anxiety, we would have no motivation to act when we need to, especially when we're in physical danger. But here's the thing, anxiety can be caused by more than just a threat to our safety. We can experience anxiety when we're annoyed. Annoyance usually happens when we experience unpleasant sensory stimulation, loud noises, bright lights. We also experience anxiety in awkward social situations when Maybe we don't know how to behave. Or maybe another person is breaking our unwritten rules we have in our heads about appropriate behavior, and that's making us uncomfortable. Anxiety directly opposes patience. Patience pushes against that urge either to escape or to fight against that which annoys us or makes us uncomfortable. Patience means calmly asking others to stop whatever obnoxious noise they're making rather than angrily yelling about it. Patience means considering that the other person may be acting out of his own anxiety, and getting anxious yourself will just make the situation worse. Patience means understanding that the other person may not be aware of your unwritten rules or expectations about acceptable behavior. Now keep in mind, I'm not talking about moral or immoral behavior. I'm talking about appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Those are two different things. Morality is cosmic and universal, but appropriateness is specific to cultures, geographical areas, families, and even individual opinions. The person who violates your expectations likely has no idea what your expectations are. And it isn't fair to hold a person to a standard that he or she has no knowledge of. Patience means suspending your expectations and extending love and grace to the other person. Now, our emotions respond to anxiety with a few different feelings depending on the situation. Anxiety turns to fear when we choose to escape the source of the anxiety. Anxiety turns to anger when we choose to fight against the source of our anxiety, to eliminate it or to change it. When we're trying to achieve a certain goal and when we're repeatedly prevented from achieving that goal, we respond with a specific type of anger called frustration. When we see another person as an obstacle to achieving our goal, that person becomes the target of our frustration. In this situation, patience might mean recognizing that it is not likely the person's intention to frustrate us or disrupt our goals. Even if it is, it could simply be that the other person doesn't understand our goal. Perhaps that other person is aware of a problem that either our goal or strategy has that we haven't seen yet. They're trying to help us. They're trying to improve our goal or our strategy to get there. We should never immediately assume that frustrating resistance comes from deliberate hostility to our goals. When our instincts and our emotions cause us to be impatient, it is our intellect that has the power to overcome our impatience. Guided by the Spirit through the conscience, the intellect has the power to imagine the point of view of the person trying our patience. Empathy is often the key to overcoming impatience. But the problem is, even the intellect can make us impatient. You see, when the instinct or emotions make us impatient, they're usually responding to current realities. They're responding to what is, but the intellect is capable of imagining what could be or what might be. The intellect can come up with all kinds of non-existent and imaginary things to be anxious about. What if I fail that test tomorrow? What if the people at this church don't like me? What if this kid makes a mess that I have to clean up? But the reality is, we don't really know what will happen. When we let ourselves be anxious about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen, not only are we exhausting ourselves for no real reason, but when we are anticipating decisions that others make, we are treating people based on what they might do instead of what they have done. Being patient means giving people the benefit of the doubt. Being patient means giving people the chance to learn, even if that means learning by making mistakes. There are exceptions, of course. We don't want to make ourselves or anyone else vulnerable to serious victimization. You wouldn't leave a cash register unlocked if you're an employee at a store. Neither do we want to leave anyone at risk for physical harm. You wouldn't want a child to play with a sharp knife. But in general, being patient means giving people the chance to engage in the messy and clumsy process of learning instead of anxiously anticipating their mistakes. So bottom line, being patient means resisting the urge to react impulsively to the behavior of others. Our anxiety, our frustration, our anger butts up against our efforts to be patient with other people. But the Holy Spirit can train us to overcome those impulses. When he told his followers about the Holy Spirit, Jesus said, "But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I've said to you." When we are fighting the impatience of other people, when we are fighting impatience, our own impatience with others, the Holy Spirit can remind us of what Jesus said about that. When we're feeling impatient, it's often because we're making assumptions about the intentions of others. We're assuming that the other person either is intentionally annoying, frustrating, or angering us, or is about to. But Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." What is judging but making sweeping assumptions about another person's character or intentions based on very little evidence? When we make snap judgments about people, we often have trouble being patient. But remembering these words of Jesus can stop us in our tracks. Of course, sometimes the offending party's actions were hostile. Sometimes they were born of ill intent. What then? Well, consider these words from Jesus. "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye?" He also said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." Is there any one of us who can claim that we have never done wrong, even maliciously and deliberately? Is there any one of us who has not experienced the shame of regret? Is there any one of us who has not underestimated the damage that our behavior and our actions has done? Is there none of us who has denied even to ourselves that we've done wrong at all? How then can we respond so harshly when others do wrong? What gives us the right? More importantly, how would it have made us feel to be treated as harshly as we've treated them? Instead of responding harshly, we should respond mindful of this great commandment from Jesus. Love your neighbor as yourself. How would you want someone else responding to you when you made a mistake? How would you want someone else responding to you when you made some sort of poor moral choice? True, most of us would welcome accountability. Most of us would want to be corrected and encouraged to do better, but would we want to be punished for it? Would we want to be ostracized for it? Would we want to have our character defined by it? Would we want others to be impatient with us? No. That's why the gospel is so appealing to us. If there's anyone who should be furious with us, if there's anyone who has the right to punish us, if there's anyone who should be indignant or frustrated with us, it's God. And yet he is gracious with us. He is patient with us. Paul writes in his letter to the Roman Christians that God, although choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the objects of his wrath. Our wrongdoing, our sin, our abuse and mistreatment of ourselves, of others, and even nature itself has rightfully aroused God's anger against us. But instead of pouring that wrath out upon us, he bore with great patience, showing love for us rather than anger. Instead, his own son, Jesus, God in the flesh, willingly took upon himself that wrath so that we didn't have to. And even now, God acts as our patient teacher, helping us learn to be righteous rather than expecting us to simply be righteous. God is patient, and we are called to follow his example. Perhaps my favorite verse about patience is actually from a letter written by Jesus' half-brother James. James wrote, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Emotions are what they are. I'm sure even James knew that. What James is calling Christians to do is to resist the urge to act compulsively out of anger. He is calling them to resist the urge to act compulsively out of anxiety or fear. Instead, this early leader of God's people, the church, is calling us to embrace patience in our dealings with each other. He's inviting us to hear when the Holy Spirit speaks the words of Jesus into our hearts. Words that keep the intensity of our feelings at bay and allow us to respond to others with love, compassion, empathy, and patience.